Well, we are at the top of the hour, and I'd like to welcome everybody to today's webinar entitled Decreasing the Delegating Dilemma, Ensuring Quality Implementation of Programming from Every Team Member. My name is Will Iserman, and I'm the Associate Director of the National Center for Hearing Assessment and Management at Utah State University, also known as NCHAM. NCHAM serves as the National Technical Resource Center for EDI and hosts a variety of different webinars on topics related to the EDI system, the Early Hearing Detection and Intervention System. And today is one of those webinars. So we're delighted to have everybody with us today. If anything disrupts your full participation in today's webinar, or if you think of anybody who isn't attending live, whom you think might benefit from today's webinar, know that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website, infanthearing.org, in the next couple of days. And so know that you can always go back to that website to review the content of today's information again. It's a good way, if you have a curiosity of one of the slides that was shown, to just go and look at them there. I want to give a shout out of thanks to our interpreters and to our captioner today. We really appreciate your time and skill and availability to help us make these kinds of learning opportunities as accessible as possible. So thank you for helping us achieve that. After our presenters today have completed their remarks on this topic, we'll open up a questions field into which you can type your questions or comments to which you would like our presenters to respond. I will read your question and then they will have a chance to respond and we'll go from there. So without any other delay, I'd like to turn the microphone over to our two presenters today, and I'll allow you to introduce yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. We're excited you guys are here. My name is Katie Cook-Ward, and we're happy to have you guys with us. I'm currently visiting you guys from Alberta, Canada, where I teach in the early learning program at Raymond Elementary School in the Western School Division. And I'll be presenting with one of my great friends and colleagues, Lauren Smith Moncondia, who is currently teaching in the USDP program in Southern Utah. With the support of our respective programs, we look forward to sharing our perspectives from our experience. Our viewpoints today may include some of the same philosophies from our programs, but today we're representing ourselves and our own experiences, and we're excited to share them with you.
All right, this is Lauren. I'm going to share with you our objectives for today. We're going to be talking about recognizing supportive communities who can help share in the teaching opportunities and the skill practices for our students. We're also going to discuss developing strategies for delegating skill practice to other providers or parents or family members. We're going to discuss reviewing some methods that you can use for data collection that can be shared across team members, whether you are the parent setting that up or you are the provider setting that up, so that we can ensure quality programming and targeting of goals. So this is the order in which we're going to target our things today. We're going to start by talking about how do you identify communities that you can delegate to. We're going to talk about how you can recognize both the success of delegation and the barriers to delegation. Then we're going to review some delegation strategies, and we're going to analyze some reporting strategies for that data collection.
Oh, this is Katie again, and I'm excited to share with you guys one of my favorite things that made me laugh out loud while I was scrolling through social media on one of those necessary adult brain breaks that we sometimes take during a stressful school year in September. And I laughed really hard because it said, "My toxic trait is not letting anyone else clean because it's not clean unless I clean it, and then getting angry when no one else helps me clean." I sent this to my husband and he's like, "Yeah, that's you." Please know that when we're talking about a child's development and a clean home, we know that they are two very different things. However, when I first think of why getting support is hard, I think of the sentence that encapsulates why. We can find ourselves on either side of this, the person who is struggling to keep up with everything, or the person who wants to help but can't quite do so in a meaningful way. Spreading out responsibilities and enlisting resources can feel like its own full-time job. That's true for both professionals and for caregivers and parents on these teams. And just like the maintenance of our home revolves around our family's daily activities and the people most often in and out of our doors, our early intervention teams have the same focus. We know that children use daily routines as their base for developing communication that's meaningful to them. And because of this, we invite the people part of those routines to help. I remember visiting with a parent who had a child recently diagnosed with hearing loss, and she jokingly asked if she could if her child could stay with us permanently, meaning she would lock him in our school's intervention program full time so she could make sure that they were getting everything they needed and she wouldn't have to feel any guilt about missing out on anything. As I reflect back on that, I laugh because I know she was kidding. But I also know that although it's a tempting strategy, it wouldn't work because a child with hearing loss needs support in all of their settings to see success, not just at school or at home when their primary professionals are visiting or when they're at the doctor's office. These daily routines with the people they love most are irreplaceable and invaluable. And a child's caretaker is their best advocate and the most needed professional on an interdisciplinary team. We would never want to block that person from being involved with intervention by leaving it all behind closed intervention doors. So while we know that to be true, that puts a lot of pressure on our caregivers, the proverbial mop holders, if you will, in this cleaning analogy. They are meeting with the professionals, gaining all the strategies, and being handed all the cleaning supplies to be used in their homes. Oftentimes, there are multiple specialists giving several tips and tricks, and you start to feel like you're stockpiling dish towels, Windex, and Miss Meyer's cleaner with no hope of actually getting to clean or use them. This becomes the delegation dilemma. We can't do it all on our own, even if we want to.
This is Lauren again, and I thought I should give you my side name. So that's my side name. So talking about our delegating dilemma specifically, delegating sounds really good in theory, but like Katie said, it's hard to identify who we can trust to be part of that delegation and do it because they won't do it the same way we would do it. From a primary caregiver's perspective, you might feel like you're finally getting a basic understanding of what your child's needs are and where you want them to go. And this is so awesome. And that deserves a moment to take a second and celebrate. But it's still very overwhelming. And you do need that support. And you might even want that support in targeting these goals. So as providers and team members, you might have programmed some really amazing activities that are embedded in routines, but now you've got to be in charge of sharing that with others. Neither one of these team members can do it on their own. They've got to bring in some other people. And you want those people to feel empowered to bring other people in so that we can have a big group to get the work done.
So this is Katie again. And just a quick note for how we're going to be discussing people in this presentation. When we think of delegation, it's usually a top-down process. We start with a boss, and then tasks are delegated down a chain of command. We see relationships with other members as one-directional. But when we're working in a multidisciplinary team with a caregiver and child as the lead, caregivers are both the boss and the person being delegated to. They're constant navigating the code switching of being in charge, but then also on the receiving end of all the heavy loads of information and strategies that they need to execute, while also then being expected to train others to help them. It's an incredibly tricky balancing act that adds to the delegation dilemma. And because of this, caregivers throughout this presentation may see themselves in many roles as both the delegator and the delegated. We hope that all caregivers in this room feel supported and find the strategies helpful to them in both roles. Because of this, some of the verbs and phrasing that we'll be using are going to code switch depending on what each slide is focusing on.
Really care about delegating. This is Lauren again. We want to know how much of a difference it makes to do things so many more times. So we've borrowed this math from the book Listening and Spoken Language Therapy for Children with Hearing Loss, a practical auditory-based guide, the first edition by Sylvia Rotfleisch and Mara Martindale. And Katie and I loved this math and the way that it really shows us why it's so important to pull multiple people in for practice of language targets for our students. So on the math, you'll see these are activities of daily living. They've picked two different kinds for us to look at. We've got mealtime and just getting in and out of the car. Then we've got how many times a day does this happen? What are the number of days the activity is performed? And the P is our potential language repetition in the daily activity. And then X is exposure to language structure. So we've got 3 meals a day, and maybe we're targeting our child using more to get more food, right? This is a really common one we see in our families. So we got 3 meals a day, 365 days a year, and maybe they'll do it 10 different times during a meal. That adds up to 10,950 opportunities for our student to practice this new language skill. And if mom or dad isn't at every meal, maybe daycare is doing some of the meal, or grandma, or whoever it may be, we could potentially lose thousands of opportunities to work on a new skill. So that's why we really care about delegating and pulling these people in, because those opportunities just can't be replaced in therapy or in targeted practice at home. But this brings up a lot of questions. Who can I actually delegate to? And how do I help those I've asked to support me to do it correctly? And how am I going to track all of this communication and share it with their professional team members so that we can make the quality adjustments that we need to make sure this child is making the progress they need? Where are we even going to start?
So this is Katie again, and I love the question. Where do we start? I feel like that's the question I get asked the most, and what I'm currently asking myself. Where do we even start? So we want to know that. We want to talk about these things, and hopefully our families we service know that they have that support of their multidisciplinary teams in our professionals that are with them. But who are we adding to that? I strongly suggest that as soon as it feels appropriate, encourage your caregivers and guardians to make a list, a physical list with a pen and paper of whom they can rely on for both their own emotional support and those who may be able to help and support their child's language development. I find the questions on the slide helpful in using this thought process. So some of these questions include, who do I enjoy spending time with? Who do I confide in? Who has a vested interest in my success? And who does my child enjoy spending time with? Who is my child motivated to see and talk to? Who does my child naturally spend time with as part of their daily routine? And what professional support do I have with my child? So I especially want to focus on the question, who does my child naturally spend time with as part of their daily routines? Don't dismiss that beloved soccer coach, that favorite daycare provider, or that grandparent that they love to FaceTime with every day. Now, as a professional, though very much on your team, I am most likely not helping with your carpool, but I can help you identify needs and create meaningful goals and strategies to share with the drivers in your carpool. So once we have that written out, we're going to go through and we're going to highlight the people whom you and your child both feel comfortable connecting with, whom you find your child spending a lot of time with, and whom you know is invested. This becomes your target list of those who you can delegate and practice with. So look at where those lists overlap, and we're going to go from there.
Now what? We prioritized a team, we're ready to take a common target, and we're working on it across important daily routines with different important people. But we do have to track those goals as well, because it could get really messy between people. Do I feel comfortable with what my child's goals are to share them or explain them to someone else? And what does that look like in settings that aren't home?
So a friend of mine once said, if you can name it, you can tame it. So again, I like to write it out. You're going to see a lot of repetition in this presentation. So we write it out. What are some of the biggest things we see in this dilemma? We don't even know what to track, how we've delegated. We're not sure that we even know the goals well enough to ask others for help. And we even want to know if it's appropriate to ask for help. And I want to tell you that I promise you it is. But we're going to take a quick little detour, and Lauren's going to tell you about where we sort of pulled some of this information from.
So we wanted to see who are the people who delegate the most and what can they tell us about what are the barriers and what is working for delegation. So Katie did a survey with some teachers and para educators at her school. In Canada, they call them educational assistants. So we'll probably go back and forth a little bit between calling them para educators and educational assistants, since I'm States lingo and Katie is Canada lingo. But Katie did a survey with these people to find out what were their perspectives. What have they learned from delegating in their program, as they have to delegate to accommodate the needs of tens of students every day, and students of all different kinds, many with atypical neurodevelopment, maybe they have a syndrome or other identified needs for special education. And the list on the right includes many of the people who do that delegation each day in order for quality programming to work at school. It can be very hard some days, but it's always going to be necessary. As a caregiver, you may see yourself both as the person responsible for identifying and sharing strategies with your child support team, as well as the one who's struggling with feeling removed from the specialist with just not enough time to communicate. Katie, will you share with us what you found in your survey?
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about these two surveys. I sent one to our lead teachers and then the other to our support staff. Teachers were asked to identify, when programming for a student who requires a one-on-one educational assistant or support member, how confident are you in what you need to be targeting or working on? And I gave the examples. What activities should they be doing? What schedule am I setting up for them? What standards are we trying to reach, and what adjustments am I making based off of other needs or diagnoses? We followed up that question with, what makes designing the program easier or harder? And how confident are you in communicating accurately what is happening with your support team that you're delegating to? We followed that with, again, what makes that easier or harder? In our support staff survey, we asked a very similar question. When working with a student one-on-one, how confident are you in what you need to be targeting or working on? Are you comfortable in knowing what activities you should be doing, what schedule you should be following, and what goals are you working towards? They were also asked to review what made this easier or more difficult, and how reporting back to the teacher was going. On the right side, we see things that made this easier. And on the other side, we see the things that made it difficult. These are just some of the responses. If you're interested in all of them, I'd be happy to share. We designed these questions to help give insight to our daily support teams, how our daily support teams might feel. They have been enlisted to help, but aren't meeting with the specialist directly and are relying on someone else to help them know what to do. The specialists then rely on accurate reporting to tweak programming or to know when to recognize it's time to call in additional support. So let's take a minute or two to read through some of these responses. The ones that stood out to me the most, probably because I felt the most guilty about doing them, was over on the helpful side when it said, it's nice when the person I'm reporting to is actively listening. They're not doing something else on their computer, and that's a huge help. When you can tell that they are listening to you, it tells me that they actually care about what I have to contribute and I want to stay on that team. I am famous for trying to multitask. We have so many things going on, a lot of paperwork to do, and a lot of things to move forward with, that when someone takes the time to come in and chat with me, I want to make sure that I'm giving them that eye contact and that dedicated time to know that what they're saying to me is valuable. And then on the difficult side, there was a lot of difficult. What I really appreciated was just the honesty that it's tricky. It's tricky trying to recognize patterns and reporting in a timely fashion before I forget, before they forget. Kids will also act differently depending on who they're with. So it's challenging because some of the strategies I'm getting aren't working when they're with me, and I'm frustrated that they're working when they're with someone else. So there's a lot going in on this, and I don't want to spend too much time here because we want to kind of get to the, I'd say, the good part, the helpful part, as we talk about some of these things that are in there. But again, if you want more information on this, please let me know, and I'd be happy to share with you the full results. So after reading through each of these responses, we've identified, I'm going to say, about 6 common barriers that seem to really block effective delegation, which we're going to outline with Lauren.
So the 6 barriers are: people felt like maybe they didn't know the child. People felt unsure of their qualifications or stated that they were just not a specialist. People said that they were unsure of where to start, or they felt overwhelmed by the amount of work to be done. Overwhelmingly, people said that communicating was just difficult. Many people identified that they felt a lack of trust in their team, or they felt undervalued by their team. And then last of all, people were frustrated when they didn't see success and they felt unmotivated to continue to try. So we're going to continue going through these barriers that we've identified, and we're going to discuss how can we solve these things and what are 3 strategies that might help.
So we're going to jump right into that first barrier. This is Katie again, where we just don't know the child. And sometimes that sounds odd because we're like, well, Katie, you just told us to identify a support team. So in theory, everybody on my support team would know and love my child. And that's true. We want to, but that doesn't always mean we do right off the bat. Our caseloads are changing, support staff turns over. Sometimes we even get new siblings, or we have move-ins, new neighbors, new people in the carpool. Constantly our support teams are changing, which is why I do encourage identifying your support team consistently. Do it a couple times each year and see if that's changing or who motivating your child is changing. But that's honestly one of the biggest barriers is we want to know this child. We just haven't had time to get there yet.
Katie, I'd like to add to that sometimes you might know the child in one situation, but there's so many other pieces of them that you don't know. Like you don't know what were the struggles they were having with their teacher last year, even though you've gotten to know them really well this year. And you don't know what kind of medical problems they've been having at home. So even when you are familiar with the student and you know that they love Paw Patrol and that's always going to get them chatting with you, you might still not know everything you need to know to help the families.
Absolutely. So knowing that, we want to jump to um, one of our biggest solves, and it sounds really simple and easy, but it's to give the background. When we have the background of the child, that can be really helpful, knowing that there's still probably going to be some nuances we have to figure out. There's still going to be some communication that needs to happen. But one of the easiest ways to do this that I've loved seeing my students come in with is having a get to know you. I know that sounds so cheesy because we've heard it so many times, but it is incredibly helpful. And if you want to know if anybody's using them, I do. As a teacher, I have them all in a file and I love them. But as your child grows and new peers and people are entering their lives and routines, we are seeing that research is showing that with respect to cooperation in a goal, a child's level is directly related to the degree of how connected that child feels to his or her caregiver and teacher. We can help build that connection to safe people by breaking out those pamphlets, creating the get to know you sheets, and inviting children to share their information and become their own advocates. You can also invite people on your team to do the same for the child. I really enjoy writing that get to know your teacher. We talk about, you know what, Mrs. Ward also loves tacos and the color blue too. And that really helps them feel comfortable telling me things that they're going through.
The next one we'd like to encourage you on, this is Lauren, is to actually share some of the medical reports and the forms that you've received from doctors. You never know when having that specific information is actually really going to help your team member understand, especially when we're talking about the professionals that you work with. They may not know what all your child will need without some of the information that they'll see in those medical reports. And discussing them together can help you as a parent understand the medical reports better as well.
Something I encourage you to do, and I don't mean this to sound aggressive as a parent, but when you are going to a new setting, you can ask them, hey, what's your system in sharing forms? How do I know your teacher has access to these? Is there a filing system that I can help contribute to? It's not passive aggressive. I promise you, it's just helpful. And then on that note, um, we are going to ask for previous notes and insights from other providers. As a professional provider, actively ask for the insight from others about what is going well and what may need to be addressed. When working with a new child you may not know, have the time to cover the meaningful details that can create smoother transitions and services. Taking the time to read previous notes respects the investment that other caregivers and other providers have put into the files being shared with you. I always love when someone said, I've read that before. It makes me want to put more effort into actually writing those notes down. So sharing that is really incredibly helpful. Lauren, do you have anything you want to add before we move on to the next barrier?
I think that there's been several times when I've gotten notes from previous providers that has really helped me know what parents have tried already. Because sometimes a provider comes in and they've got this list like, oh, we need to discuss all these different strategies. And maybe the parent has already discussed them with another provider 6 or 7 times before that. So going in and not just assuming the parent hasn't heard anything before can be really helpful in building a good team relationship. to look at what have they done? How can I help them from where they've already been?
I love that. So thinking of our next barrier, I'm unsure of qualifications and I'm not a specialist. That's probably the one I hear the most. In my early learning team, I'm really lucky to have 5 wonderful support staff members that come in every day. And the number one thing they tell me is, I don't get paid enough for this, or I'm just unsure how to help, or that's great, but I don't have the background you have. Can you help me out? And I think that's a very valid barrier when you're just unsure of what your qualifications are and you don't feel like the specialist you want to be to help this child. It might be a little easier to be like, you know what, I'm going to step away and pass this along to someone else with more experience. That's a very large barrier we face, especially in the school setting.
This is Lauren. Even those that have qualifications sometimes feel like they just don't know what they need to know to work with a student. I've talked with lots of different SLPs and teachers and even teachers of the deaf who've said, "Yeah, I've never worked with a kid with this diagnosis before. I've never worked with a kid who just got their cochlear implants before. I've never worked with a kid with hearing loss before. And I just don't know how to do this. This is not my specialty. I can't." And I think that this is a barrier that really can hold some people back, even when they have qualifications and when they feel very comfortable and confident in other situations with other students.
So I'd like to clarify, this is Katie again. Lauren and I, by no means saying practice outside of your scope. That's not what we're saying, but we are saying that when we empower our parents to really know the goals, I'm going to switch over to our next slide, then we can simplify and clarify to have people help where they can, and when it's appropriate. So our first strategy is really simplify and clarify. When reviewing and writing goals in a team, make sure that you can state them in terms that are clear, make sense to you, and are free of any technical jargon. If you as a parent or if you as a professional can't state the goal this way, I promise you they're not getting worked on by you or anyone else on the team that might need them. We have to be able to clarify what that goal actually means and how we would work on it.
This is Lauren. When you got to that point and you're ready to delegate, you need to be able to help someone know whether you want them just to let you know if the child did that thing, you're just looking for the skill, or do you want them to help them get to the skill? And prompting can be something that's really challenging for people. And we're going to talk about it more in just a second. But I want you to start thinking about already what happens most of the time when you tell someone, oh, can you see if the child knows what this item is? Like maybe do they know what the baby doll is, what to call it? Most of the time, that person is going to hold up the baby and say to the child, what's this? And they're going to hold up something else. What's this? And we get into quizzing mode. And kids get very tired of quizzing mode. And then when you actually do need to get a quiz done or a little see how they're doing, they won't perform for you anymore. So be really conscious of what does prompting for look like and what kinds of things can they do. Some resources for that might be the listening and spoken language strategies. They include lots of different ways to prompt. If you need some resources on that, you can send us an email. We'll point you to some really great ones. I know there are some on this website that people have talked about before in these webinars.
Love that. Our next strategy is share the when and where. I'm going to argue that the most overwhelming part of having a goal shared with you is not knowing when it's supposed to be targeted or where it's most likely going to be successful. Without sharing this information, your delegated team member might lean to the extreme of over targeting to exhaustion or under targeting to no effect. I like to give the example. I am a very proud auntie of a brand new baby. He's 3 days old, really excited. And their older brothers are my neighbors and they get to come over all the time. We were talking about requesting because we were working on advocating for our voice and having all those wonderful skills in place. His mom very politely told me that even though we want to acknowledge that he's advocating and requesting in full sentences, I'm not allowed to give him a gummy snack every time he does because he was going home with like 15 bags of Gushers. not effective. However, we found that this was a really effective strategy and goal to work on when we were playing with toys like Lego. The more pieces we requested, the more we could play, and it avoided the bellyache. That was really helpful for me as the auntie who wanted to give them everything, to know when this strategy would be effective and when we wanted to see this goal in a way that wouldn't hurt him.
This is Lauren. The next barrier we're going to discuss is being unsure of where to start or feeling overwhelmed. So we've addressed this just a little bit with knowing the where and the when, but we feel like there's still just a little more to this. Katie, do you want to tell us your story of the client you were working with a few years ago and what that mom told you?
I love this mom and this client so much, but I remember sitting at the table with her, and I just come out of grad school. They taught us to be inclusive and to involve the parent in setting goals and making sure that we were viewing that perspective and really valuing that home life. And so I very eagerly jumped in and said, "What do you want to work on? Let's figure this out together." And this sweet mom turned and looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "I was really hoping you would tell me where we start." And I thought, oh, I really appreciated that. In an effort to be collaborative, I took away my opportunity to give her support and to give her a starting point and to show her where we could go. I think that's one of the biggest barriers we may face is this is all really overwhelming and we don't know where to start. And I'm unsure how to get going.
And I think that's the opportunity for the professional to really chunk this into pieces. So instead of giving them the whole goal, we're going to start really pie in the sky, high goals, high success. We need to start down at the bottom. What's the first step? What's going to be the second step? And sometimes even talking through with the parent what each step is going to be ahead of time so that they can see we have a plan. We know how we're going to get there. It's not that far away because we know all the things we need to do in order to get to the end.
Love
So,
that.
sorry, I'm starting the next one. The solve phrase that we came up with for this is to share the how. Share successful strategies. So I talked about prompting a little bit before. This is where that really comes in. As a professional, you can share what's working and what strategies you've seen from your experience as a professional working with other students. How do you get this target met? And then as a parent, you can share what you did with the other people that you bring in. Wait a second for the interpreters to go over. So if self-talk has gotten your child talking a lot, you could share with grandma how to do self-talk so that when she's playing with the child, she can get the child talking to her as well. Or maybe your child really loves auditory closure and really loves that idea of jumping in to help you know how the song ends. Well, you could share that with the carpool so that they could sing a song on the way to school and know to wait for that last word.
I love that. Our next strategy is to provide materials in the helps. This seems obvious, but I'm just going to throw it out there because sometimes that's what we miss the most. If you are asking for help that requires a specific object or material, send it or make an extra set. Include clear instructions on how they are to be used. This is relevant for itinerant teachers helping mainstream teachers, parents helping daycare providers, and school audiologists helping learning support teachers. If you're hoping grandma will watch your child practice their handcrafted pan flute from Botswana, please assume that you need to send the the handcrafted pan flute from Botswana.
All right. The last strategy we had for sharing the how was embrace the questions. Sometimes it can be really overwhelming when someone starts to ask you questions about something that is new to you. A few years ago, I was working with a family who had just gotten their cochlear implants. And mom called me in a panic because 2 days a week, grandma was the person waking the kids up. And grandma had tons of questions about these cochlear implants. She wanted to know how expensive they were and why the child needed to wear them first thing in the morning and what was really happening when she put them on and what was the goal and how was everything going to work. Mom was so overwhelmed by these questions that at first she called me to complain that grandma just wasn't on board and she was never going to be able to get grandma to help and it was all going to be bad. And so I shared with her the idea that maybe instead of grandma being against what was happening, grandma just wanted to know more because she cares so deeply, both about her daughter and her grandson. that she just needed more information so that she could be a functioning member of our team. And so we talked about the answers to all the questions that grandma had. And of course, mom shared those and it brought up more questions. So then we made a plan for us to sit down all together so that grandma could ask me the questions and I could help mom feel more confident in her answers. Well, come to find out, grandma's most important thing to her was she wanted to know, was this child going to call her Mimi, just like her other grandchildren? Because she felt like being Mimi was so special. Sorry, Mimi, M-I-M-I. It was that Southern grandma name, everyone's got to come up with their own. But this was what was most important to this grandma. And so we were able to share with her that that could be one of our goals as we went along. But the first step to getting to that point was that he needed to put the cochlear implants on in the morning when she was waking him up so that they could have that special communicating time together when she was at their house.
Love that. That's beautiful. Coming in, honestly, I think that leads right into this next barrier. Communicating is difficult. It just is. It's a skill that we will be trying to navigate as adults, as children, our entire lives through relationships, through friendships and work. Communication is just hard. and I don't mean to say that lightly, but it is a skill we're going to have to work off. But it's a very real barrier when we're talking about delegating skills. And I love that. Sometimes we have to look at, is this an issue of trust? Is this an issue of communication? Is this an issue of not understanding? And they all really boil down to an issue that communicating is difficult.
And I want to add, Katie, that just finding the time to communicate can be really difficult because parents are busy and professionals are busy. And how do we really carve out enough time that we can be clear in our communication? So that was what Katie and I looked at when we tried to come up with our solve phrase, which unfortunately for communicating is difficult. The solve phrase is to communicate. So
I think that's very funny.
I know I did too. There's really no way around it. We just have to communicate. So our first strategy for communication is this KISS, which both Katie and I heard when we were growing up. And if you haven't heard it before, it stands for keep it simple, stupid. And that might not be very polite, but it's a good acronym for helping us remember that we do just need to be simple. We don't need to beat around the bush. We can be direct. We can tell people exactly what we're talking about. And we don't need to be complex either. You don't need to hand over a whole standardized assessment because not everybody needs to look at that and analyze it. They might just need to know, oh, this student is struggling with the endings of words, the past tense and the present tense. So that's all that person really needs to know to help out.
I love that. Our next strategy is to set clear expectations. And we talked a little bit about this with some of my colleagues as we were going over some of the barriers. And they said it's tricky because oftentimes we are delegating to people we respect and who have a lot of experience. So we want to respectfully say something like, it's up to you. You've got this. I totally trust where you're going to go with this. But when you might not feel comfortable, you can feel that it's not validating. It's actually more difficult. It makes me feel unprepared and unsupported. So after sharing goals, instead of saying, it's up to you, you do what you want with that, you can say, do you have any insight or ways that you would suggest we target this? One is respectful, one is overwhelming. So just try to watch that phrasing of, it's up to you. I totally trust you. You go with it. And you might. And that's good to say. There's a difference between I trust you and I value your insight. And I trust you. You don't need support. Go for it without me. One is, again, overwhelming. One is endearing. Just try to lean on the other side of those.
I feel like this is Lauren again, that data is one of the places where this really comes into play. And we promised you we were going to talk a little bit about how to share data across team members. And this is where we're going to bring that in. We really encourage you to get very creative in how you're sharing data and to be specific, because that will really help the other people on your team know what you want. So Katie in the past has done like a running Google Doc with a family so that the parent could ask specific questions and she could check into it when she had the time during class. I've used Google Forms where I could be a little more specific about what I was looking for so that my educational assistants knew, okay, I'm supposed to be counting how many times the child does this skill. And we could use the multiple choice buttons so they could say, okay, he did it 5 times in 10 minutes. So I need to select 5 times, I need to select 10 minutes and then submit, and then it comes straight to my email. And I can also share that with the parents and other support staff that need to see how the students are doing. With parents, you've got more options because you don't have the same restrictions for like FERPA that we do of making sure that we're using something that really protects your information carefully. So I've had parents use Marco Polo with their babysitters or with their grandparents so that they could take a video during therapy of what they were targeting and how they were targeting it. And then when grandma has the kid, they can look back and check how that went. And they can take their own video to let mom know or dad know that this was successful for them as well. And then don't forget the super easy thing of just a notebook. It can go back and forth. You can write in it what you're looking for, what you need, and it can just stay in the diaper bag.
I love that. So thinking of our next barrier, I wrote this down, not hesitantly, but it's odd to put lack of trust. I'm a very trusting person. I want to feel that everybody's in there and that everybody's doing well. But what I think it comes down to is it's not that I don't trust that person's skills, it's I don't trust this to stay safe. I work in a very small town and it's a wonderful town, but there is not a lot that happens in this town without it being discussed at the grocery store, which has its total perks and some downfalls. Sometimes we hesitate to delegate and invite people into our space to help support our child because we're unsure of how that information is going to be perceived by others or if it's going to be spread in ways that we're not comfortable with. That's a very big fear that some of our families and some of our workers are worried about coming in, is we don't know how this information is going to get out to others.
And this is Lauren. I wanted to talk about maybe the flip side of that is that when you are part of a team, there are times that you can feel very undervalued and that maybe you don't belong as part of the team. My first job out of college, I joined a very big group of teachers of the deaf. And on my very first day, everyone went around and talked about what their specialties were. And it became very quickly apparent that all of the teachers of the deaf on the team that I was working with specialized in ASL development specifically, and that there were no other teachers on that team who worked on listening and spoken language. And I felt a little bit like a fish out of water. I thought, oh, I hadn't experienced anything yet about the two sides being somewhat opposing at times. And so this was my first experience working closely with teachers who used ASL for language development. And I didn't think that I really was meant to be part of this team. And so I was very quiet for quite a while. And I was so appreciative of one of these team members who came to me outside of a group meeting. And she said, Lauren, we were all part of the group that decided that we needed to have a listening and spoken language teacher as part of our team so that we could have a whole range of options for parents. And so we're going to need you to speak up because we need your voice because you don't know what we know, but we don't know what you know. And I really appreciated that because until that point, I just felt like I didn't belong. And so I think when we're feeling undervalued, that can be a time that we try not to collaborate when we really should be collaborating.
Thank you for sharing that. So on that side, when we're collaborating, we want to do it with care. Thinking about what that is, it means we need to be respectful and sensitive of some of those informations that we're receiving. I like to joke that secrets are just phrases that we share with one person at a time, and that's not the case. That shouldn't be the case. This cannot be true when entrusted to help on a child's care team. Caregivers and professionals alike need to set clear boundaries with other team members on what information can and should be shared with others outside of the support team. Just knowing that that boundary has been communicated and that rule has been set creates trust and respect that's necessary for support. Before sharing a piece of sensitive information, I always ask people around us to ask, is this necessary to help their care? And would I say this if the primary caregiver was present?
Love that, Katie. This is Lauren. I want to talk about assuming competence as a strategy for collaborating with care. Collaborating, it can be so hard when we're not sure how competent the people are that we're going to be working with. Can they really do what we could do? Well, the answer is yes and no. But you have to assume that the adults around you are quite competent and that they can handle the challenges that come up, especially as you work together. And as each person feels that you trust their competence, they will become even more competent as they'll take on more responsibilities, they'll be more committed, and they'll increase that spirit of cooperation.
I love that. This also feels simple, but if you're unsure, ask. Asking questions and listening to the answer is a sign of respect more than it's a sign of incompetence. Take the time to ask and clarify and learn more, especially as time goes on and you've been a part of the team longer and longer.
Okay, the last barrier we want to talk about today is the barrier of not seeing success or being unmotivated to continue trying.
Guys, this is just hard. It really is. We love it. It's a beautiful work. We're happy to be a part of it. It's something we wouldn't change, but that doesn't change that sometimes it's hard. We don't see the progress we want to see, or we don't see how our part of the puzzle is fitting into the bigger piece of what's going on with these families and these children that we're servicing. And that makes us sometimes unmotivated to try. So when we come over to this next side, it seems simple, but it was probably one of the ones that moved me the most when we looked through strategies that were helpful. And that was to celebrate success. Take intentional time to do that.
So when you see that the extra practice is paying off, share that with somebody. Tell them that you know that their efforts are making a difference. I was so pleased yesterday to run into a client from a previous year. I ran into the parent and she said, "Oh, wait, I have to tell you this story about my student in his new class. Last year, we spent a lot of time working on his ability to recall what's going to happen and to predict what's going to happen next in his classroom. And now he's in a new class. We're not working on that goal anymore." But she went to visit and she saw him using that new skill to help another student adjust to the new class. And I was able to share that with my educational assistants as well. And it was a long slog through that to try to fix that last year. And now he's doing it so independently and well. And we were able to celebrate that all together and all feel uplifted.
And in that, that almost feels like a thank you. When you have someone celebrate the progress with you, even if those words aren't said, it sure feels that way. When I was reading through the survey results, I was reminded that although we choose to do it, it's not easy. Hearing thank you and what you're doing well as a team member is incredibly helpful for the morale and keeps you involved and invested. So keep those two words close on your sleeve. And at that note, I want to say thank you for taking the time to come and listen and learn with us today. We always appreciate the opportunity to get to do these things and to share the experiences we have.
These are our references if you'd like to look at them. And we always hope that you'll reach out if you want to continue the conversation. So we've got both of our emails as well, so that you could reach out if you've got any further questions. And I think we've got a couple minutes left to look at the Q&A and see if there are any questions today.
Yeah, hi, this is Will Iserman again from NCHAM. And Gunnar, if you want to turn my video on, you're welcome to do that. You'll notice that there's a Q&A field at the bottom of your screen there. You're welcome to type in some questions there. And you already received a thank you, Lauren and Katie, for the handout. So, and the handout they're referring to is the one that is posted in the chat there. So if you haven't seen that, go ahead and download that so that you can have the benefit of that. If folks have some questions and they're trying to compose them, one of the questions that came up for me, and it's coming from a US context, and it has to do with how to formalize some of what you're saying in terms of the IFSP or the IEP. What are your thoughts about that in terms of making sure that team members who are key at a particular point in time when where their input would be valuable is in fact included in that formal planning process.
Yeah. Since you did say US, I'll take this one. But I really encourage my parents to think about the people that are a daily basis type of person that's working with their student and invite them to the IFSP or the IEP. It's one of the parental rights that they have to include anyone in that meeting that they want. So even if a person is not part of the formal team at the school, you can bring your private speech therapist to the school meeting. You can bring a grandma, you can bring a neighbor, you can invite a daycare provider. And I think a lot of parents don't know that that specifically is part of their rights, to have that person part of the team, to have that person sign the document and to be part of the discussions.
Yeah.
Although we have a slightly different system up here, we do have similar feedback. That kind of that thing is, how do I make sure that these are being represented on the document that's protecting my child at school? That's probably one of the best questions we get. So I'm glad you posted that. Something that's helped us up here is we make sure that if it's not included in our school division's template to have it in there, that I take the time to train my staff and the teachers to either send out a survey, talk with the parents in an informal or formal conversation, to invite someone to come, or to have them write a letter or their insight on that child. And then we actually upload it into extra documentation that stays with the child's file, so that if we want a perspective on how this child is doing somewhere else or other insight they have, that it's documented as if it was like a medical record or something similar to that. It's all easy to find in their files.
Have you
Yeah, and that's true in the States as well.
Have either of you had any experience with a strategy kind of like this, where you might suggest to the parent, being in a meeting like that, I will do my best as the teacher or the interventionist to make it as comfortable for you to share your thoughts. But it can be a little overwhelming for a variety of reasons. Is there somebody in your life who would be good to have beside you, who knows how to make sure that what you have to say is said?
Oh, yes. And I've done this personally as well, because I have a nephew who has an IEP, and my sister was very nervous that she was not going to get up the guts to say things she wanted to say. So I went to the IEP, and my only job at that IEP was to say, oh, excuse me, my sister has something to say. Oh, excuse me, my sister has something else to say. And
Yeah.
it was very effective. And I love when parents bring somebody like that to their team meetings.
Yeah. And how to convey that invitation or encouragement and to legitimize it. Do you have any suggestions on how to make that feel, like an authentic invitation?
Yeah. So you have to send out, as the teacher, you have to send out a notice of meeting before the meeting. But you kind of have to talk to the parent about when the meeting's going to be before you send out the notice of meeting. So when I send out my notice of meeting, I will ask the parents, okay, these are the official people that must be invited. Now, your parent right is to invite anybody else that you might want to be there. And I'll give some examples of the types of people that have been at these meetings in the past with me, and just say, hey, can you think of anybody like that you'd like me to include on the notice of meeting? Then it's very official.
I'm really glad to hear that. So another question here. How often do you see cued speech being used or have parents even ask about it?
Yeah, I have either been in the field with my license or been an aide in the field for 15 years now, and I have only seen one student myself.
And Katie?
I apologize. I got excited and I actually read down to the next question. And I'm going to pause and let you pose that, and then I will defer to Lauren. I liked what she said. I actually don't see it very often up here. I'm in a very rural community.
Yeah.
So it's not that it's not a valuable way to communicate. We just don't have the specialty to use it up here. So we see that other modes of communication are utilized more just because that's the access we have up in this area.
Sure. So the next question then, what do you do when you're a part of a team and the child is very involved? The child may be at a profound level but keeping the child alive is more important. What do you do to provide support to the parents? I struggle with this person says.
So Lauren and I actually had the opportunity to develop something called functional priorities, and it's actually designed to be, it's written in a conversational format where it poses different questions to decide what those are. But we specifically designed it for a couple of kiddos that I had in my caseload that are very similar. Although hearing loss is profound, it's definitely something that's on their list. It is not the highest priority because there are other things happening to them that are taking higher priority. So when that's the case, you involve even more specialists, you involve even more voices that are coming in, and that can start to feel incredibly overwhelming. So that very question is what posed this sort of offshoot of the delegation dilemma, but at the very core, it started with functional priorities. We have a whole presentation on that in forms that I'd love to share with you because I could talk about it for hours. So I'm just going to invite you to please reach out via email, and Lauren and I would personally love to meet with you and talk about that all day.
Yeah, we
And
have
their
a really, sorry.
emails are on the screen right now.
Yes.
So be sure to jot those down if you need them.
Yeah, we've even created a guiding form, a chart, if you will, that will kind of walk you through some specific questions to ask the parents to really get down to what is the heart of what matters in your therapy, because there is so much going on for some of these kids we work with.
So one final question as we approach the top of the hour already, if you can believe that. And it is a question about healthcare providers. We're talking today largely about all that goes on outside of the context of healthcare provision. But healthcare providers are a touchstone for families. What role do you see for them in either a member of this team or learning about the importance of this team and supporting the family in assembling that team for the context that you're describing?
Yeah, I think that is a really tough question. We know our healthcare providers everywhere are stretched very thin, and the pandemic made that only worse. And so some of these healthcare providers, although they want to be a big part of these teams, don't always have the time to do some of the back and forth communication that we're talking about. And that's where we think that simplifying communication really comes in and empowering parents to be the middle, even though being the middleman can be so hard. But when parents really get the information from professionals on both sides, from the healthcare provider as well as from the school professionals, then they have the ability to share that information back and forth, to share data back and forth. I think that's one of the reasons why I'm very passionate about putting data in parents' hands so that they can see what the data actually shows themselves and can even walk that to their doctor the next time that they're there, so that they can feel more empowered to tell the doctor what they need support in. And whenever possible, getting people in the same room or at least on the phone together, especially when we're talking about audiologists and good cochlear implant fit. The cochlear implant can be really finicky, and spending time actually discussing what's happening with the child's speech with the audiologist can really change how those maps are made.
Well, thank you, both of you. We are at the top of the hour, and thank you to everybody who's been in attendance with us today. It's been a rich and important conversation. And what wonderful providers you are. Your energy is really awesome. By way of reminder, this webinar has been recorded. So if you can think of others who might benefit from the information presented today, or if you want to review it again, you can at infanthearing.org in the next couple of days. And you can get it anytime there. Thank you to our interpreters and our captioner today as well. Thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Bye.
Oh, before you go, note that in the chat box, there is a a quick survey to complete that will also generate a certificate of attendance for your participation in today's webinar. So click there in the chat and you'll be able to have, give us a little feedback as well as get a certificate for having been with us today. Thanks, everybody.